Zero Waste video series. This week we'll be talking about preventing food waste. We partnered with our friends at the Natural Resources Defense Council, or NRDC, to learn more about the scope of food waste and how each of us can be part of the solution to make sure that food makes it into our bellies instead of the landfills. Let's get into it. Imagine going to the grocery store, getting 5 bags full of food and dropping 2 of those bags in the trash on your way out of the store and then thinking nothing of it. That is essentially what we are doing with our food today. In the US, up to 40% of food goes uneaten. That much food would be enough to feed 164 million people their full diet every day of the year. Why is food waste a problem? You may think food waste isn't a big deal, that you can just compost it or it'll break down naturally in the landfill, right? But when we waste food, we waste all of the resources it takes to get that food to our plates. The tremendous amount of water, land, and energy used to grow our food, move it from the field to the store, and keep it at a cool temperature. In fact, wasted food is the single largest item going into our landfills, and when it winds up there, it emits methane, a potent greenhouse gas. If food waste globally were a country, it would be the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gases after China and the United States. According to Project Drawdown, reducing food waste ranks number 3 on the list of the top 100 most impactful interventions to address climate change. So we don't just want to compost food waste or throw it in the trash. We want to prevent the waste and the environmental impacts from happening in the first place. To do that, let's look at where the bulk of the waste is happening. Food waste happens across the entire supply chain, from farms to processing to the store. But in the US, the largest contributor to food waste is at home. NRDC's report looking at where food is wasted found that more than 2/3 of all food discarded in the homes of people surveyed was potentially edible. In Denver, the average Denver resident wastes 4.2 pounds of food each week. The most common foods that Denverites toss: coffee poured down the drain, milk, bread, chicken, and bananas. So how do we reduce food waste at home? The NRDC has a great website with tips and pointers to reduce food waste at home called SaveTheFood.com. It's filled with recipes, storage and shopping tips, and great articles to get creative about reducing food waste. Let's look at some key tips. Tip number 1, try meal planning and shopping with a list. The Save the Food Meal Prep Mate can help you make a shopping list, portion your meals, and maximize what's in your fridge. Start by thinking about what meals you want for the week, including what food you've already got in your fridge and pantry, how many people you'll serve, and what kind of leftovers you'll want and can commit to eating. Once you've planned your meal and checked your current food supply, make a shopping list. When you get to the store, exercise restraint and use that list. Tip number 2, get creative and use more of your produce. For example, did you know that celery leaves are great when used as an herb to enhance flavor in soups and salads? And whoever said that peels need to get trashed or composted? With lots of fruits and veggies, all they need is a good scrub, and the peels are good to eat. And there are lots of ways to revive foods that are on their way out. Brown bananas, peel them and put them in a banana bread or in the freezer for smoothies. Tip number 3, remember the leftovers. Leftovers get buried in the fridge and forgotten. One way to remember leftovers is to put a sign on them that includes the date it went into the fridge. Designate a place in the front of your fridge for them to live until they're eaten. Tip number 4, use proper storage. Proper storage is key to making your food go further so that you can eat every last bite of edible parts of your food. Save the Food has an entire library of different foods with instructions on how to store them so that they stay fresh and tasty for longer, like storing celery upright in a glass of water on a fridge shelf, or using the freezer. Putting foods in the freezer is kind of like pressing the pause button, and so many foods taste just as good after they've been frozen. Did you know that you could even freeze eggs? Just crack them and whisk them and store them in the freezer for up to 2 months. Thaw them out in the refrigerator before you use them. Tip number 5, understand date labels. Date labels such as use by, sell by, and expiration dates on foods can be confusing. The reality is that these labels actually have very little to do with food safety. They're not federally regulated. Generally, date labels are more of a guesstimate of when certain foods will be at their peak quality. But if you go past the use by, best by, or sell by date, it doesn't mean that your food will be suddenly spoiled. One good strategy for figuring out if food is still good, if you've stored it correctly at safe temperatures, is to use your eyes, nose, and taste to check the quality. If you're concerned, check out Save the Food for tips. Tip number 6, support systemic change. Food waste is the result of systemic problems within the food system. As consumers, we have the power to significantly reduce food waste, but we also need to work to change the system that leads to food waste on a bigger scale. Vote with your dollar and be active in creating a resilient, sustainable, equitable, and healthy food system by supporting your local community garden and purchasing from farmers markets, signing up for a CSA. Thanks to the NRDC for these great tips, and thank you for joining us to learn how to prevent food waste. This is the last lesson of the Zero Waste video series. Thank you for joining us and learning about zero waste from home. EcoCycle will start our Plastic-Free July Challenge soon. Sign up for weekly tips on reducing plastic use and waste.
Hi, my name is Jasmine Barco, and I'm the Denver Outreach Coordinator for EcoCycle. With me today is Denver Councilwoman Robin Kniech. I'm excited to be talking with Councilwoman Kniech about something very important, but often overlooked when we think about zero waste, and that is reducing food waste. Councilwoman Kniech, why is reducing food waste important to you?
Well, I had the benefit of learning a lot about landfills from my spouse. She actually was an employee who worked at a landfill and took youth on tours and educated them. And I learned a lot about the methane gas that's produced. I think sometimes people think, oh, well, food's organic. If you bury it, it just kind of gets eaten by the worms and it's no big deal. But the truth is that that gets thrown away in the trash is compacted with other things. It's very tight. The air can't circulate, the microbes can't circulate, and it really doesn't decompose the way that we might think, even in a landfill. And so food waste for me, it just doesn't belong in a landfill. There's lots of other alternatives. Even if you're not jumping right to composting, there's maybe someone who could eat that food, or there's a way you could prepare that food and not have to waste it at all. So for me, it's about that reduce factor, right? If I'm not buying more food, if I'm able to eat what I have, I'm reducing the carbon footprint of the truck it took to deliver that food. And I'm also preventing that methane gas and some of the landfill usage.
What is the city or other organizations doing to reduce food waste?
The city partnered with the National Resources Defense Council a couple years ago to create a food action plan. And one of the first pilots that came out of that was really working with our restaurants. That's a place where we have a lot of food waste, both the preparation waste as well as sometimes the uneaten food that comes back from customers. Before COVID, of course, this was an industry that was, part of our thriving economy, but also a pretty big contributor. About a quarter of the food waste in Denver was coming from restaurants. Fortunate to have some great nonprofits. We have a group called We Don't Waste that works with large events. So for example, when I've hosted conferences before and had leftover food, they are able to make sure that that food is safe, and if it is, to repurpose it and do donations to shelters or other food programs. And then, we have done an education campaign. Along with that National Resource Defense Council partnership, have really worked to talk about this in our community and to minimize food waste, talk about other ways to deal with food. So I'm pretty proud of our city for having that partnership with our community organizations. Lots of resources here in Denver to learn about minimizing your own food waste.
Finally, we like to end with a tip for our viewers. How does your household reduce food waste, and what tips would you recommend for our viewers?
My one little solace during this period has been that I built some new raised beds with my family in our front yard where there's no trees and no shade. And I have had the most successful vegetable garden I've ever grown. And we have more food than we can eat. So the first thing I'm doing in my house is I am giving food to neighbors. And, it's kind of one of those great community building opportunities, right? Hey, I've got some kale, I've got some lettuce greens. It creates a chance for a conversation. We do it over the property line from our 6 or 8 feet away. We mask up when we take our bags of veggies over. You could even go as far as getting your cottage food license, which is a law that I passed in 2015 to allow people to sell their excess food that they've grown, or maybe honey from their bees, or maybe they have created some special cookies that they make. You could literally sell from your front yard right now if you get a little cottage food license from the city of Denver. So check out our Denver zoning office if you want to sell your excess food. And then, we are big compost. You're not supposed to put meat and dairy in your backyard compost. So we had the city compost for things like that. We can also put the weeds in it that we don't want in our own compost. So we actually have a combination of the backyard compost and our and our alley compost with the green bin. Another tip I have is when you've got something that might not quite be where you'd want to, slice it up and eat it fresh, especially vegetables, you can probably, still use them a day or two later if you put them in a cooked dish. So I might saute them, or, even an old carrot that maybe doesn't have great flavor, I might shred it up and, bake it in something. So those are some tips from our household that have really served us well.
Thank you again, Councilwoman Kniech, for joining us for our Zero Waste video series. Remember, everyone, to reduce, reuse, recycle, and compost.